Hi everybody. So if those of you who've read my profile, you'll know that I'm employed for the Ministry of Defence as a learning support coordinator. So the title of the thing, there's a bit of a communication thing about neurodiversity, but I will reference neurodiversity in the thing. So hopefully you're going to get more than that. You're going to get the story of how I tried to embed a coaching culture at St Athan and the story behind it. So when I was first asked to do this talk, I suggested I talk about coaching, how coaching is delivered in a main military training establishment. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to comply because each environment uses a different model of coaching and mentoring, and I don't consider myself to be sufficiently well informed to critique any of them. But examples that are working include coaching at #1 radio school at Cosford. RAF Cosford themselves have a model of coaching, and the Royal Marines have also used coaching in collaboration with Bangor University to reduce wastage in trainees. Regarding mentoring, there is the Civil Service Mentoring Scheme and the New Zealand Air Force Service Mentoring Scheme, which is endorsed by David Clutterbuck. So they are sort of more extended references if you're particularly interested in them. As you can see from the picture, there's a large number of people working at #4 School of Technical Training St Athan. These range from male and female students aged 16 to 55 years old. RAF apprentices who undertake a 14-month residential course where the males live in a 16-man room. They learn together, eat together, socialise together and exercise together, so it can be quite claustrophobic. There are 90 plus civilian and service trainers at various stages in their career, and an equivalent number of staff undertaking support functions. Although there are other qualified coaches and unqualified staff using coaching approaches to leadership and teaching, I'm effectively the only active coach within the establishment, and even for myself, it's an associated function. Hypothetically, this could be seen as my client base. I'll talk to you about how my practice has evolved, adapted and changed later, but typically my clients range from introverts, extroverts, confident, underconfident, angry to passive, proactive to reactive, to name but a few. So before I go through the menu of topics I'm going to cover, I would like to emphasize that I'm not looking for sympathy, nor am I seeking praise. I genuinely love what I do, and I hope it comes across in the presentation. But it's my intention to tell the story to an audience who might have little or knowledge of what life is like in a military training establishment. The focus of this talk will be my personal experiences trying to implement a coaching culture and how I've adapted and changed how I work, and to quote my boss, ended up becoming a single point of failure. So aspects I'm going to cover before I can, again, it's important for me to, before we talk about coaching, to inform those of you who are unaware the cultural aspects. We'll talk about the current challenges and the culture that exists here. Pre-existing support agencies, aspirational coaching framework, and extracts from the terms of reference that I developed, why it didn't happen in the intended format, the referral process and techniques I used, the challenges of being a single point of failure, and measuring performance and feedback. So in this picture, you can see how the landscape has changed over the past 80 years. So St Athan previously existed on two separate sites, East and West Camp. One undertaking aircraft maintenance, and the other side ground engineering training. At its heyday, there were about 10,000 people working on camp. Now it's nearer to several hundred. After a number of changes and cost-cutting measures, the training school is now all that is left from an RAF perspective, with a notice to close in 2024. Significant aspects that had a detrimental effect on morale include the cancellation of the matrix training solution, the top right, which was proposed to include all ground training at St Athan, was going to be the hub. That's now become a different model. A reduced real estate, which has impacted the identity of the unit, with the parade square being reduced to rubble, as you can see in the bottom right, and surplus accommodation being demolished. More recently, there's a number of change programs to modify military training, such as putting it online, reducing the amount of residential training, to name but a few aspects. but at local level, an attempt to align St Athan with Lyneham, where the school is going to be relocated in 2004, is a significant issue. So cultural differences. So what are the things? So Jordan 2003 referred to culture as the way we do things around here. And I don't think I'm the first person to highlight the impact that culture can have on an organisation's effectiveness. Here are some examples of individual cultural differences that can neither complement or divide. So the first one is the Civil Service Code. It's applicable to civilian staff and emphasises the need for integrity, honesty, objectivity, and impartiality. Apparently, it also applies to politicians. The second one is Air Publication 1, or AP1 as we would call it. So this emphasises the behaviours expected of RAF servicemen from the lower end up to the higher end. So it talks about things like respect. And in terms of respect, we talk about mutual and self-respect. Integrity, it talks about moral courage, honesty, and responsibility, and justice. Service, it's talking about physical courage, loyalty, commitment, and teamwork, and personal excellence, discipline, and pride. So quite high standards which are emphasised, and there's no apology made for including those. For those who are promoted to the rank of corporal or above, so we're into the management thing, effectively all of the trainers here, from a military perspective, there is also Appendix 27 from Queen's Regulations, which dictates the standards expected of non-commissioned officers, and includes being prepared to accept a high degree of responsibility, show initiative, and inspire confidence. And the last one that overarches all three of the above is the Code of Practice for Trainers. So this was introduced as a result of the deep cut review into bullying and all sorts of negative things that impacted the military at that time, and the subsequent ALIA report. This emphasises key behaviours that are expected of all trainers, and includes things like maintaining professional distance, fairness, not abusing rank or position, equality, respect, challenge, and safety. And the last one, which I'll cover more in depth later, is the attitudinal goals matrix. So that is how we measure trainee performance against Air Publication 1. So before looking at the framework I proposed, I think it's worth spending a few minutes on the support agencies that were already in place and impacted on mental health, and stuff like that. So the Elwyn development flight, so that is manned by 8 RAF non-commissioned officers, ranging from corporal to flight sergeant, who are independent. They're an independent agency, and they came out again from the ALIA report. They operate outside of the training flights. They oversee aspects such as allocation of accommodation, introduction to the unit, and they support trainees to deal with grievances, complaints, they deal with group dynamics and such like. Although they undertake a mentoring role, they're not trained or qualified to do so. So from my perspective, they represent a bit of a filter, but they will refer clients to me, and they will also usefully monitor their progress after a coaching intervention. Care and welfare. They look after children, so people have come from foster homes and stuff like that. They look after the under 18s, and they monitor them, and they also look after things like students who've got issues such as bereavement in the family, or extended health issues with family. They're manned by 2 senior non-commissioned officers, a sergeant and a flight sergeant. Again, they're not trained as coaches or counsellors. Most of their work is sensitive and is primarily referral and monitoring agency. They don't themselves, but they do sometimes refer clients to me. One of the outlets from care and welfare would be SAFA. So they're not the only agency they refer with, but they're probably one they do the most. So SAFA are an external organisation who work with serving and retired personnel and their extended families. We have 1 person allocated to support us, but they don't reside at St Athan. They're on a temporary basis, and she is very overly subscribed. But referrals, as I say, are primarily done through care and welfare, and sometimes myself. The medical centre, as you would expect, they don't share information on clients that are referred to them, but I will refer clients to them if it's beyond my boundaries. So, for instance, mental health issues and stuff like that. The only issue with that is that physically I can't make somebody go to seek medical support. So I can suggest they go there, but they have to go there themselves. So that can be problematic. The other issue is that, generally speaking, there's a sense of being stigmatized, and from the student's perspective, are worried that they might be thrown out of the RAF if they're perceived as having mental health issues. So they're not particularly enthusiastic about going there for those type of issues. And the last one on the list is the padre. So the padre is, as you would imagine, is primarily there for the religious aspect, but he is a world-class listener. He can offer a higher degree of confidentiality than I can. He has the ear of the station commander, and he also is able to refer to both internal and external support agencies. Although we don't work together on a daily basis, I will sometimes refer people to him if they need the heavy listening part of it, and then he will refer them back to me to do the strategy. So we can work collaboratively or independently. So looking at the coaching model as I envisage it, I'm not sure how clear the image is on the right-hand side, but basically we're looking at level 3, level 5 and level 7 coaches. So when I first explained this concept to one of my previous station commanders in 2012, I think it was, the biggest challenges I envisaged were getting the policy document to an agreed standard, finding the money for training, and identifying who would be the best person to act as a coordinator, matching clients to coaches. The one thing I was sure of at the time is that if I was going to be doing a coaching role, then I didn't want to be also doing the coordinator's role, because actually I think they're contradictory. So I saw the coaching coordinator as being independent, ideally not a coach, and being able to take feedback on the process. My initial plan was to acquire the initial pool of level 3 coaches from trainers who had completed a defence trainer course. This course provides the underpinning knowledge for level 3 coaching and mentoring. It's low cost, but in reality, it does take extra effort, and not many people have pursued it. The level 5 qualification, I would see as those who are the best, already previous experience as coaches, or maybe those who identified them as being more proactive and actually getting better feedback. I saw them undertaking a dual role of working with the mid-level management, but also undertaking an associated role, which is the defence training supervisor. So the defence training supervisor mentors defence trainers into the role, and then oversees lesson observations and stuff like that. So it's been quite a big additional responsibility. The level 7 aiming more at management level. So the level 5 qualification again is relatively cheap to access, because RF Cosford provide this course at relatively low cost. The level 7 qualification would have been accessed from a university like University of South Wales or some sort of external provider, because it's not naturally occurring in service. And the same then would be said for defence. Again, supervision, I initially envisaged that would have to be undertaken externally, because that competence wouldn't exist naturally at the start of it. My concept being is that we would start looking at targeting training at the trainers and trainees, and then offering the coaching then to staff once that system had been embedded. So one of the aspects I was able to complete was the set of defence terms of reference. So one of the terms of reference I suggested, again, these will be aligned with codes of conduct, I'm sure, showing the respect the ability, dignity, rights and worth of every client. Now, you'd think that's a gimme in most coaching situations. It doesn't always exist within a service environment where some of those people are promoted above their rank, and maybe that emotional self-awareness isn't there. Placing the client's needs above your own development. Again, I was very conscious there were some people who really wanted the qualification but didn't necessarily want it for the benefit of students. They wanted it more for the benefit of their CV. Not to put yourself in a position where you could be perceived as exploiting vulnerable students. Again, it's something I have to be very conscious of. I have 16 and 17-year-old, both male and female students. So I have to be very careful how I work so that I don't create vulnerable situations, but ultimately ensure you're qualified for the activity you coach. It may seem obvious, but again, we know that boundary management can be difficult, particularly in my role. Observe clear boundary between friendship and intimacy. So what I say to my students at the start of a coaching session is that we don't have to be friends, we don't have to say hello to each other outside of this room. And what you'll often find is that students will, and what I find is that they'll walk to the other side of the room after the coaching is finished. That's okay. I know what's going on in the room, and I don't need their approval. That's basically because of maybe they don't feel comfortable in the group, they don't want to be perceived as being weak or whatever. I'm not sure what it is, and it doesn't really matter. As long as the progress has been made, I'm really quite happy with that. Act as a good role model by consistently displaying high standards of behaviour, appearance and personal values. Again, this is something that I advocate, I aim for. And actually, so what's happened as a result of this, when I started showing this to prospective clients, some of the potential coaches objected to being held accountable for maintaining high standards. You'd think that would be a gimme. And others were not very enthusiastic about having confidential feedback on their performance. So even though I don't have a coaching coordinator, we do have a central point outside my chain of command that is able to look at the feedback on my performance and actually hold me accountable. So from my perspective, even though it didn't generate any clients, it certainly got rid of those who might have potentially abused their position and created situations where they're coaching people who might not have wanted to be coached. So what are the underlying reasons of why this didn't happen? In reality, there's no single answer, but the first point here is significant. So the station commanders rotate in a 2-year cycle. So the first 6 months is about them getting to know the environment, getting to know the job. The last 6 months, they're winding down towards the next job. So they've only got a year of effectively productive service. That sounds a bit harsh, but they are working, they have bosses above them who are setting objectives, and sometimes they are higher objectives, higher priorities than implementing a coaching system. So giving examples of that is handing over the airfield to the Welsh Government, rationalising training, or the RAF 100 celebrations, which took about a year of organising parades throughout Wales. There's something like about 25 to 30 parades we were involved in as an organisation. The end result is that implementing a coaching culture without higher level endorsement, as we got here, it's like swimming in custard. So effectively, it's a bit disrespectful to say the boss doesn't need a coach, but actually, would he want to be coached by somebody who's just one or two grades below him? Possibly not. But actually, without that high level endorsement that you get in organizations like Google, it does become a challenge. Continuous threat, as I said, this has been going on for some time. It implements on how far people are prepared to plan ahead. Find the right candidates. Trainers, servicemen get posted, servicemen retire or move on to different jobs. So all of that can have an impact. Budgets are certainly, I've referenced their membership of awarding bodies and CPD. It's not built into policy, so therefore it has to be agreed, it has to be endorsed. But added to that, of course, would have been supervision as well, which would have been another additional cost. In my personal experience, I had to pay for that out of my own pocket. So again, that does become a negative. And the last one is spare capacity. We have had an endless amount of projects coming in, which have all in their own way sort of taken away people's spare capacity, which naturally would have fitted in their own coaching. And line managers buy in. Again, if the line manager doesn't see this benefit in them or they don't believe in coaching, then they tend to become a blocker. So I referenced earlier the attitudinal goals. So the attitudinal goals is one way that people are referred to me, but it isn't the only way. So my original concept was that, and I actually did initiate, was to have handwritten sort of pre-printed request slips that were available around post boxes located throughout the unit, and then people could put the request in there and I would get back to them. What's actually happened is that in over time, students have been given laptops, so they all have an email capacity to send requests by email, and basically that's the way I work now. So whether it's staff or students, they send me an email, I put a meeting request, put it onto my internet, and organise on my calendar. Other ways that people can be referred, trainers might, because I do lesson observations as part of my other role, and that's mentoring role. So sometimes from that, trainers will come to me and say, look, can I do some coaching with regards to maybe career progression, leaving the service, looking at a new job or something else. Trainees can be referred from a training review board. So a training review board is held as a result to discuss their progress if they're failing exams or there's a perceived problem with them. a problem in attitude, I'm saying in that sense. Or basically maybe the trainers got themselves as a concern about the trainee's progress. So the way that this matrix works is that they're assessed against 6 categories, and they're all scored from the bottom to the top. So if I give you, that's not big enough for you to read, I appreciate, but if I give you an examples, so they scored from D all the way up to A, which doesn't make much sense, but basically at the bottom you have D, C, B, B plus and A. I don't know why it was done that way, but I didn't design it. So at the bottom end of attitude, you would have 3 statements. Shows no motivation towards developing their own potential, with no preparation for or participation in lessons or tasks, makes little or no effort to positively interact with instructional staff or peers, has little or no focus during lessons, and demonstrations attitudes need frequently addressing. So that would be, so what we're looking at, the way I work this is we work from the bottom up, and when you identify 2 out of 3 that are a match, then we stop. So if they're scoring in the D or C, then the chances are the trainer would refer them on that. Now this is quite a useful tool because it actually measures entry-level standard, it measures potential goals they can work at, and it also measures progress after the event. To give an example of where we're looking at the top end, exceptionally motivated to develop their own potential, and it participates fully in all lessons, is proactive and respectful in maintaining positive interactions with members and instructional staff and trainees, gives the instructional staff full attention during lessons and demonstrations. So you can see there's quite a big difference between that, and sometimes we can have quite a provocative conversation about where do you think you are, where do you think other people think you are, and sometimes I may even ask them for evidence to say where is the evidence to support you being in that, getting that score. So it's quite good for raising emotional intelligence. But one of my guiding principles is that I attended a lecture in Cardiff with a lady called Nina Jackson, who's an educator. She does a lot of educational talks. And she actually said that negative, what we might sometimes refer to the service as negative behavior, bad behavior, is usually somebody trying to communicate to you that things are not right in their world. And actually, I definitely use that as a guiding principle. So when I start off, they normally come into me anxious. They sometimes don't want to come and see me. So the first thing I'll do is work very hard at building rapport, trying to calm them down. I'll even tell them they don't have to work and they can leave if they want to. But actually what I will sometimes use is what's called, as one of the guiding tools, is the emotional needs audit with human givens, which actually highlights some, so we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think this is a much better tool because it talks about things like, do you feel in control of your life most of the time? Do you feel connected to some part of the wider community? Do you feel secure in all major areas of your life, such as your home, work environment? Do you feel your status and it's acknowledged? So there are 10 statements on there where they could score themselves from 1 to 7. 1 being obviously not so good, 7 being good. And actually sometimes that can identify sort of gaps in their life and actually can change the conversation around from being quite negative and quite challenging to more positive. So before I talk about some of the tools I use, here's an example of some of the challenges. So C.D. Peters refers to the rule of 5 when dealing with people. And he talks about, so Stephen Peters, for those who weren't aware, did the chimp paradox model. And what he said is one person will dislike you no matter what you do, one will like you no matter what you do, and 3 will sit the fence and make a decision based on what you do. From my perspective, I'm not trying to please, but I'm trying to maintain a respectful relationship with all 5, any group of 5 that are coming my way. So that's getting back to what I said earlier. I have to be conscious of how I communicate with clients and keep it respectful, even if we don't necessarily like each other. But at the same time, the challenges that come with that, as Peter Hawkins once said in one of the earlier conferences, if you know what's going to happen in a coaching session, it ain't coaching, and that's definitely true of me. So I have to very much deal with things as they come. But some of the challenges that I have no days off in terms of performance. If I have a bad day at the office, if I have a bad interaction with a student, they'll go back and tell the rest of the course, and the rest of the course may talk to other people in the courses, so actually I could end up with no clients. And the same thing could be said for trainers as well. Unrealistic expectations, so that my bosses don't have never really bought into coaching the way I'd like them to. They don't really understand coaching, and there's this perception, sure, other people have it, go and do your magic stuff. You know, there's this expression, you can pull rabbits out of the hat, you can work with anybody, you can produce miracles, and of course that's not always true. In fact, it's rarely true. But to that end, there is, you know, so from a training review board, they send them my way, and actually sometimes they don't want to come my way. And that, of course, if they don't want to work with me, that will impact on how effective the conversation is going to be. Free and restricted access. This is more from a staff perspective. You know, come into my office, there is an expectation. I'm always available to have a chat, and I've had to be quite firm. One of the things that underpins what I do is to be honest without being destructive. So, from regards to trainers, I'm sorry, can't do it now. Do you want to book an appointment at another date? The same thing with. You know, so it's being honest, but without being sort of dismissive. The need to record sessions. So there are two ways that I record sessions. For staff, I can, particularly if they've requested it outside of the work environment, then we can go to the traditional stuff of coachability matrix, the coaching contract, agreed protocols, agreed meeting places, etc. And actually, I don't need to involve the chain of command in that. But with regards to students, there's an expectation that I feed back to my bosses what's going on there. And the way I tend to work is I don't write anything down, I just go off memory. That works for the students because it means I get better eye contact with them, puts pressure on me to remember stuff. But what I do then is I write a summary of the intervention, and I make them aware that that's going to happen, and that gets passed then as evidence to the training review board. With students who are more anxious or whatever, then what I will do is I will send them an email copy and allow them to proofread it before I send it. Now, I appreciate not everybody would do it. I don't do it with everybody. I don't have to do it with everybody, but actually normally that works quite well in maintaining rapport and maintaining their confidence. We'll come on to the need for a diverse skill set, but effectively I have a very diverse population with a lot of diverse needs. So that means that I have to be step out of the traditional coaching framework to work with people, and I'll show you examples of that in a second. And managing boundaries, as I said earlier, then with students, they refer to me as Mr. Davies, and I refer to them as AC and whatever their surname is. I don't have their phone numbers, they don't have my phone number. We communicate by a service email system, and actually that professional distance is always maintained, and actually that's the way I'd like it to stay, you know, so they don't come around my house, I don't come around their house, and that's the way it stays, okay? Conflicting priorities. One of the issues for me is that I don't just do coaching, I'm also the learning support coordinator, so that means that I test people for learning difficulties such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and visual stress. And I'm also in charge of overseeing the performance of defence trainers, their introduction and monitoring their performance. So there's quite a lot of things that, and wear a lot of hats is what I'm trying to say. So in this slide, you can see some of the things that influence my background, how I work, and I've highlighted a couple of them. So continuous improvement may not seem an obvious link to coaching, but actually there are tools within continuous improvement that actually can be quite useful. So a good example of that are the Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is a really good tool to introduce to managers. You know, again, very often you'll find that a lot of the bad planning is because there has bad decision making is because there has been no planning. So actually putting through that cycle can be quite a useful conversation piece. Force field analysis, where you're looking at aspects that are working for, aspects that are working against, or Kanban I use for students. So Kanban has got 3 boxes. What needs doing, what's in progress, what's finished. So you produce like a sheet of paper, they put post-it notes on there, and then it helps them then to manage their revision process. Neurodiversity, so my background in neurodiversity enables me to move sometimes between things. So what somebody comes to me with anxiety issues, as happened recently, sometimes can become something else. In this case, the guy's high level of anxiety was a result of visual stress because he's getting hyperstimulation. So through conversation, we can end up then referring to testing and then to come to a different place and then come back to coaching at a later stage. High performance coaching. So there are links to the military and high performance coaching as regards to goal setting, high expectations. From my perspective, I'm very mindful of the students we train are leaving as technicians, and they will be expected to operate independently within a very short space of time. So actually giving them too much support does not work for them and sets them up for failure later on. So actually there is an element of scaffolding, maybe a high level of support at the start, but it does get withdrawn over time so that we start to encourage independence. The type of things that might work within is a BHAG, the big hairy audacious goals, or the All Blacks no dickheads policy. If I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, it's quite a good thing for culture. The chimp paradox, again, is one of the tools I use quite a lot. It's very good for, it's a light-hearted way with sort of young students for helping them to identify where their thinking is maybe not as productive as it could be. It gives, and the best of all, it gives them a chance to reflect on their behaviours, and also gives them a strategy for dealing with things in the heat of the moment. You can imagine 16 of them in a room together, there's opportunities to get quite emotional, particularly during COVID. So examples of strategies that have adapted or used. So on the top left, we talk about positives and areas to improve. So I use this as almost it comes from the learning neurodiversity side of the house, but actually with people who have no confidence, trying to get them to set goals is really quite difficult. And actually what I try to do is just help them to build solid foundations. So I challenge them to find 15 to 20 positives that are going on in their lives. So, and sometimes if they can't do it, then I say, well, if I can come to, I'll challenge and say, well, if I can come up with more than you can, then there's something wrong, isn't it? So actually I'll maybe highlight one or two things that they don't realize. So I would certainly help them with regards to the positives, but actually it can range from, you know, having a steady girlfriend, having money in the bank. It can be any of those sort of things. But what's going well? You know, do you have a supportive family? Have you been able to save up enough money for a car? Are you doing well with driving license? Are you passing exams? Do you have, you know, anything along those lines? I'm looking for at least 15 as a starting point. And then on the areas to improve, we're looking at about 3, which become their primary goals. So that will then move on to like a little grow model or something like that. Once they've achieved the goals, they move from the areas to improve into the positive, and we set new goals. In the top right are the strength cards. Again, that's a really useful tool from my perspective because there are no weaknesses. So those who are lacking confidence don't have any weaknesses to hide behind. But what I'll challenge them to do is put them into 3 groups. Strengths that you're using, and everybody will agree. Strengths that you're not using as much as you can, and strengths that you don't use at all. And then after they've put them in those groups, then we'll discuss them, go through them, and depending on what we're working with, if somebody's overconfident, we may ask them to justify where they put everything in the strengths that I'm using, everybody would agree, or on the other side, where they're putting everything on the bottom side, I'm not using any of these, they're not strengths, and then I would start to challenge them, because by this time I've got some knowledge in them, but actually, what about this? Does this not represent an example of where you're doing something well? So kindness is a good example. You know, somebody's saying, well, I'm not very kind, but actually, what about when you did this? What about when you gave that person a lift? What about when you helped that person with their revision? And then it just starts to change that dialogue a little bit. The accountability mirror comes from a guy called David Goggins, who was quite an interesting character. He's an ex-Navy SEAL. And actually, that's on the challenge. It's not for everybody, but actually on the people who want to challenge themselves, what you basically do is on your mirror, you would put post-it notes with all of the goals you set for that day. At the end, you take a photograph of it, and at the end of the day, then you look in the mirror and all the goals that you've achieved, you take off. The ones you haven't achieved, you look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself why you haven't done it. So again, it's not for everybody, but actually it's quite an interesting way of working. And then in the one on the right is the Pixar model, which comes from Disney. Well, certainly they were part of Disney, I don't know if they still are or not. And actually it's a good way, again, I don't deal with trauma, but sometimes you can go back a little bit on the story and actually say, right, let's rewrite the story. So if somebody's telling me a story and they're justifying that to explain negative behaviors and so on, and say, well, can we not change the story? Can we not, we'll give the story a title, me the loser to me the winner, maybe, or something like that. And actually maybe change this, reword the story, change the words they're using, tapping into the growth mindset, fixed mindset, and even use that as part of planning a better future. Let's use this as the first day. So once upon a time, let's use that today. And then what are the things you're going to have to do? So there's Benjamin Zandler talks about writing a letter into your future self. And it's a little bit along those lines, and so what's the end outcome? What do you want? Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be in 2 years' time? So again, that's quite a useful tool. So, and I know Dave T's in the call here somewhere, so I'm sure he's laughing at this, that I think it was 2012, Rob Reiner was invited to the coaching conference, and I think he emptied most of the room when asking the question, does coaching work and does anybody care? Actually, I quite enjoyed his talk. It was very provocative, but actually it did get me thinking about my practice, about what am I using as evidence? How do I know it works? Now, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but actually, these are things that I think contribute to evidence that maybe something positive is happening. I wouldn't go so fast as that. And what I will emphasize is that I never take credit for students' improvement. At the end of the day, as Rob Reiner quite rightly said, if somebody's improved their performance as an exam performance, it might be because something's changed outside there. They might have had a girlfriend or a boyfriend, they might have come into money, there could be any other things outside of coaching that's made that change possible. But examples of, so improved exam performance, less failures, less TRBs. So a reference to a student I was working with just before Christmas and I'm still working with now. When I first started working with him, he's borderline pass or failing exams, and on the attitudinal goals matrix, he was scoring Ds. Now he's perceived as he's getting B pluses, and actually he's getting 80% plus in exams. Now, things that have contributed to that is a diagnosis of visual stress, which has helped calm his anxiety, some of the coaching I've done, but actually there are many things that maybe is outside of things that have contributed, but I take no responsibility for that, but actually I'm happy to see it happening. So confidential feedback for remedial questionnaires. So at the start of the course, I deliver 6 pages of study skills. So we do things like time management, meditation, active reading strategies, note-taking strategies, all these sort of things. And at the end of that, what I used to do, and is in this example next page, is actually give them the opportunity to give feedback confidentially. So we hand out the feedback forms. They don't have to put their names on, only their course number. The senior man collects all the information, puts them in a brown envelope, and then hands them over to me when they've all been completed. I've now modified that, so I put it onto Moodle, and the only thing I know is the end results and who submitted. I don't know who submitted and who said what. So actually, that in itself could be quite interesting. Aim and development for IAEF, do 3 monthly interviews with students anyway. I piggyback onto that, and also for exit interviews to ask, are the learning interventions I'm doing, are they having any value from the student's perspective? Have they, do they want to come and see me again? Course conferences, so that undertaken as part of the quality system. We also get audited externally from within the MOD, and we also have Ofsted inspections. We were lucky in the last, I was not lucky, it was an example of, we had a 211, which is really very impressive. The whole organisation, not me. We have the Mori survey, where students, again, can comment independently on how their well-being and stuff is commented on. And also from the defence trainers, I also get, on my performance as a defence training supervisor, where I do work with trainers, I also get independent feedback delivered directly via Moodle. And again, I don't know who said what. We just collate all of the information. So I'm not the only defence training supervisor. We collate it and discuss it in a meeting, and then we discuss how we can do better. So here's some examples of the feedback. So the top left is an example of the written feedback as was received by myself. I'll be honest, in that case, 7 is very satisfied, 4 are satisfied, and it's talking about how I performed as a trainer, which to me is good information. I'll be honest, they haven't always been like that, and I couldn't find any examples where they were never at the bottom end, but certainly sometimes they were sort of less complimentary. On the top right, they've referred to blog, that's my nickname. So that's a copy of an unsolicited email from a fellow trainer who was pulling his hair out trying to help a student to learn maths when the student had high levels of maths anxiety. Now, I didn't do anything with the maths. All I did is have a conversation and talked about how we could use his strengths, etc. And I'd like to say that it had a happy ending. It didn't, in as much as he didn't pass this course, the maths was beyond him. But it did have a happy ending as much as the coaching allowed him to, he's got away with a lot, he's got to identify what his strengths are. He's now gone into a different trade. He knows what trade he goes, he knows what he can use within his strengths, he knows what he's good at. So even though it's a slightly negative, it's potentially going to move towards a positive. And in the bottom is an example of extracts from the quality review with students. So that's done with the quality manager. And then as you see there on the far right hand side, OC Training Squadron is my boss. So the students' feedback is fed back to that, good and bad. And then there's the action on my boss to either tell me I'm doing okay or to tell me otherwise. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions? Are they coming through yourself, Cara?
Hi, Elwyn. Let me just double check the chat function here. There's been some comments along the way. We did have a question from Steve a little bit earlier on. Steve, are you still around and would you like to pop your mic on and ask a question? Not sure if we've still got Steve. Oh, sorry, he's got no mic function. Okay, let me read the question out for you. Bear with me. Okay, so hi Elwyn, hello from RAF Cosford. We have very similar issues and I think it would be good to touch base with each other. A couple of questions, if I may. You mentioned that you would need to ensure that your coaches are qualified for the activities that they coach. What style of coaching are you using? Secondly, have you found that the station execs buy into your concept, as do the instructor, but it's the middle management, the frozen middle, are the blockers?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, regarding the blockers, if you've got high level buy-in, there is no blockers at middle level because actually you get the accountability fitting in. It's back to selling the concept. If you look at the Google model, when the person at the top buys in and says, I believe in coaching, I do it, then it sort of becomes acceptable to everybody. When you've got people, you know, even though I'm not in no way disrespecting my bosses, but if they don't actively step out and sort of say, yes, I'm behind this, this is something we want to do, then it always becomes a bit more difficult. Regarding the style of coaching I use, it varies. I mean, it depends on the client. And so sometimes I will use collaborative coaching, so peer-to-peer coaching. Sometimes I'll use challenging coaching. Sometimes I use provocative coaching. Sometimes I use neurodiversity coaching. And sometimes I use more traditional versions of mentoring, as in sort of the GROW model. So it does really, I try to, whatever I do, I try to cater towards what my clients want. And I don't know whether that answers the question.
Thanks, Elwyn. And there's another follow-up to that from Steve as well. Interested in your views referencing NLP in the military coaching environment.
Okay, so I do use NLP and I use it very sparingly. I've heard some horror stories where people have tried to use it with people with PTSD, and I think it's a very dangerous road to go down, in my opinion. I have a friend who's a human givens practitioner, and when I listen to the way he treats things like that, I see how, and again, I've known other therapists, so I tend to not go near it in that regard. I will use it in terms of perceptual positions. So for those who are unaware, I will maybe encourage people to step out of who they are. So we have 3 positions. If they've got an issue with somebody, they vent in a safe space at a sheet of paper. They then step onto that sheet of paper and accept what they've just said from the recipient's perspective, and then they step into a 3rd position where they look from an onlooker. So there's again, that I think is quite harmless. Using time anchoring is another example I use. Again, not with highly anxious people or vulnerable people, but sometimes as a confidence technique, somebody using doing presentations. I would definitely use it in that perspective. And I certainly use a lot of reframing, again, using different language. Regarding with the military, I think I've certainly seen examples where people have misused it, and they've used it, I think, unethically. You know, they've used it to play games, to score points, to undermine people. And I do have an issue with that, I'm going to be honest.
Okay, we've got another question here. It says, not Steve, I think they're in a group together, but they don't have a mic. So I'm a corporal that has coached a group, I'm a corporal that has coached a group captain, worked really well with amazing results. Has they respected my skill set as opposed to my rank? So sorry, not so much a question, but just some input there.
And it's personality based. So I am aware. I was talking to a lady at a different unit the other week, and she was talking about she was looking in for information regarding mentoring. I wasn't able to fully satisfy. I was able to give her references, but one of the things she referenced was that she had somebody of a very high rank who had the emotional intelligence and was quite amenable to it. If you've got that, then you're lucky, but it isn't naturally occurring, in my opinion. You know. But again, if you make it work, brilliant. Any more, Cara?
Not that I can see. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question while we've got the opportunity?
I've just seen one here, reverse mentoring is a useful tool if the culture will support it. Yeah, I'm happy. I fully agree with that. And actually to a point where I would, in certain situations, if I had the skills, one of the things I'd like to have done is encourage students to take on mentoring, and it has happened partially. So if I give an example of a lady I was working with a while ago, she was very introvert. So actually she was coming into the sessions with some big issues that I think we only ever we never really discussed them. I had to talk around them. I had to be quite inventive about, she would hint at what they were, but she didn't want to share them with them, so I got to encourage her to use journaling as an example. And then one of the things that came out of that is the strategies that I was doing with her, she was taking back and using with her sisters. So that's an example of where it can work. But yeah, reverse mentoring, I have no issue with that. I'm quite happy to be mentored or taught by anybody that's got the competence. So they are introducing the reverse mentoring scheme. Okay, so hopefully it'll be better than the last RAF mentoring scheme, which confused coaching and mentoring together and actually had a lot of cross wires in it, and didn't have a lot of scrutiny in it, in my opinion. I think the training for it was not particularly great, but if it's improved from that, then that's great. So I'm not sure who that's coming. I'm only seeing part of the message here.
That's a comment from Sue Mansell. Sue, feel free to turn your mic on if you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, I've just listening to the story. I thought that I had some tough times in command and control organisations in my time. I've just got huge admiration for the job you're doing in what would appear to be quite a hostile environment in many ways to the kind of thing that you're trying to introduce. So huge admiration. Hats off to you.
Thank you. I mean, if I've impeded there are some challenges, I'll be honest with that. But actually, I also have some really good collaborators. We talk about, what enables me to do less supervision than I probably should is the fact that I have some very good, honest people around me, wise people who I can, they would hold me accountable. I can collaborate with. So it's not all bad news. And even to my boss, I have to sometimes be very honest with both the station commander and my immediate boss. But actually, you know what? They do take it on the chin. They respect where I'm coming from. They realise that it's not personal. It is professional. And actually, what I'm saying to them, even though they might agree with it, is well intended. So yeah, but yeah, there are challenges, particularly with we're talking about job insecurity and stuff like that. But I just try to do the best I can. I don't take it home with me. I do the best I can with what I've can, and for the most part, I'm quite happy with life. Any more, Cara?
Not at the moment, no, sorry.
Sorry?
Anybody else?
Okay,
can you see that chat at all? We've got,
yeah. Yeah, I can't see it fully though. Is that
That's okay. So we've got Spencer Fielding. We deliver the ILM coaching and mentoring to our JOs and to the wider force. So I feel that this is being more recognised throughout the RAF.
Okay. Is that at Cosford, is it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so from my experiences of Cosford, I wasn't able to comment on Cosford as a whole because even though I do know people up there, but the when Radio School is an example of an organisation, for me, got it nailed. I mean, when I walked,
That's where I work.
Yeah, so when I walked in there, there's a sense of people being aligned, people having coaching conversations, showing respect to each other. And I wasn't there. I didn't visit the start, but there was a guy called Stevie Peters, who's one of the people who was at the founders of it. But I have had conversations with Stevie in the past, the other Stevie Peters, not the coach, Jim Paradox one. But he acknowledged that the difference when the sort of heads of the units changed, there were sort of complexities that came in, and even he, it hadn't been a smooth transition even for him. But yeah, huge admiration for actually what you've set up there and the way that you continue to evolve.
Thank you. Yeah. I just like to raise it. It's being recognised a bit wider, I think.
Yeah, I just didn't. I picked up a reference on the internet, and it was referencing one of the publications around the Birmingham, Cosford area and the Wolverhampton area. But I was fairly sure. I obviously know it's ILM accredited, but actually I wasn't able to reference that, and that's why I didn't want to go down things that I couldn't back up with some sort of evidence.
Okay, so thank you ever so much, Elwyn, Blood. Very much appreciate it. I know we sort of dragged you in to do this, but I think it's been a really worthwhile session, and I think showing the diversity of clients that you work with is massively important, because it does show that coaching can be used in so many different contexts. So thank you ever so much for that.
Thank you.
So it's just for me now to finish for the day, and I'd just like to thank you all for your contributions to all of the sessions over the last 3 days. It's really made it worthwhile, and it makes these events come to life, so very much want to thank you for that. We do hope you've enjoyed this year's conference, a little bit different to normal, and hopefully next year we will be back face to face. But we will be doing it slightly different again. We've already been thinking about how we can add virtual to it so that not everybody has to come to the venue. So watch this space and see what we can do. Big thank you to all our conference speakers and conference supporters. Too many to name at this moment in time, but we really do appreciate their support, their help, their time that they give to this every year. Big thank you to my team and the conference team for pulling all of this together. Every year, it's one of our biggest events, and we very much look forward to it. So the only thing for me to do is ask you to complete the evaluation form, please. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. We do take notice of it, and we try and act on it every year to try and make these events bigger and better. So please do take 5 minutes just to complete those. Cara has posted the link in the chat, but it will also be sent out again via email, and we'll keep badgering you until you actually do complete it, so please do it. The recordings will all be made available, so those that have attended the sessions, you will also get recordings of the sessions you weren't able to attend, so everything will be available. They are not in the public domain. They will only be available for those that have attended the conference, but it does mean that you'll be able to make sure that anything that you couldn't get to, that you won't have missed out on. So thank you all. I would wish you a safe journey, but I'm pretty sure most of you haven't got that far to travel. So please enjoy the rest of the evening. Have a lovely weekend, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you, everyone.